And I'm telling you, I really want you to take your tie and jacket off. Wow.
You were making him uncomfortable.
Yeah. So I got really cool. I took off my jacket, I unbuttoned my vest, and I loosened my tie. And he's shaking his head, and suddenly he reached into his desk drawer, took something out, walked around the desk, came over to me and cut off my tie with a scissor, reached in his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, which back in the 70s was a lot of money for a tie. And he said, go buy yourself another tie, but don't wear it in my office.
In this episode, you'll get to know Mike Blumenfeld, the sage entrepreneurship mentor, and you'll hear his nearly 9-decade journey from management consulting to becoming one of the most beloved business mentors in New York City. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is My Success Show. Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Show. This is where I speak with some of the most successful people I've met in my life's journey, and I'm looking for universal principles of success to help both you and my family. In case it's your first time here, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've taught millions of people how to be successful through my online courses. With this show, I wanted to create something lasting to help my family succeed, and I thought you'd also enjoy learning along with them. I interview people who have achieved multifaceted success in many areas of their lives, not just career or financial success. And during the interview, I'm looking for actions anyone, including you, can take right now to become more successful. So, as you listen to today's episode and hear his story, look for something you can do, an action you can take today or this week to make my guest's success story a part of your success story. And you're going to want to do that with today's guest. I met him actually in prison in California at Soledad Prison with an event we were doing for Hustle 2.0. So Mike Blumenfeld is the owner of Myron I. Blumenfeld and Associates. He has over 70 years of management experience working with companies of various sizes. He's held many senior leadership positions throughout his career. Mr. Blumenfeld holds a BS degree in economics from the Wharton School and earned his MBA from New York University, where currently he is an entrepreneur in residence. He is a chair emeritus of the WIBO Workshop in Business Opportunity. Mike has taught, counseled, and mentored hundreds of entrepreneurs to help them start, manage, and grow their business profitably. And recently, Mike is a mentor and advisor to a Forbes 30 Under 30 CEO, the founder of Crenshaw. Mike, thank you for agreeing to be on the show. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Oh, it is my pleasure, Dave. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Where are you located today?
I am on the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Oh, it's a beautiful area. We were talking about that. New York, Manhattan, that's my second favorite city in the world. I love my home here in Salt Lake, but I sure love to go and visit Manhattan.
Yeah, I have a very special place. I overlook the East River and all of Queens, so I have one of the few views in Manhattan that's open space. It's gorgeous.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm gonna have to come out there and see that view if that's okay with you.
Love to show it to you.
We met at Hustle 2.0, which is a group that teaches entrepreneurship, teaches life skills to people who are in prison. But we met in California. It was at Soledad Prison,
Right.
which is very, very far from where you are. And the fun thing about it was my son went with me, who's 18. He was the youngest coach that they'd ever had there. And you were there. And you're now how old at this point?
89.
89. And they said that you were the oldest coach that they had there
Right.
at the event. So it was fun to have the youngest and the oldest. And my son talked to you, and he talked a lot about the stories that you told him. So you certainly made an impression on him in addition to the men that were there.
I sought him out.
Yeah. So as I was contemplating and I invited you to come speak, I realized that I have such a challenge here because you do have such a long and illustrious career. We're going to do our best to get through the highlights of it. Let me start, though, by asking the question I ask every guest, which is when you were young. And I'm talking about when you were a teenager growing up. What did you want to be, or what did you think you will be for your career?
I didn't have the vaguest idea. I was completely snowed by the future. Had no clue as to what I wanted to be. My father was a dentist. He wanted me to be a dentist. He never pushed it or forced me, but I know he would have loved for me to have taken that on. And that had absolutely no interest for me at all. So I just kept going, pushing through. I started one business. I sold candy to all my neighbors.
Oh, okay.
That was my first entrepreneurial. And that was fun because, yay, people gave me money for giving them candy. Wow, that was a big thrill.
Was it profitable?
Yeah, as long as I didn't have to pay for the candy, which my father did, my mother did. So I just collected all the profits. It was really a good business.
It's funny. My first entrepreneurial venture was the same thing, Mike. But I went to the local store, I bought the candy and sold it to the kids. And I felt like I was doing fantastic. I was like, oh man, this is so great. And someone said, oh, you're selling this for 10 cents. You're selling it so cheap. I'm like, yeah. What did you pay for it? Oh, it cost me $0.25. So I was buying things at 25 cents, selling at 10. I was losing money the whole time, but I thought I was a great entrepreneur. I'm sure you did better than me in your candy sales. Well, I guess yours was free. Your inventory was free, so you could sell it for whatever you wanted, right?
Right. Yeah, but I guess I made my choice of careers. It's very interesting.
Oh.
I graduated high school when I was 16.
And what year was that?
I was 16 in May, and I graduated in June.
Okay.
That was 1950. And so I was 16 going on 12 maybe. So I had a lot of maturing to do. And my parents actually, I don't want to get too involved here, but my mom died when I was 13. Before she died, she told my father who to marry when she died because she knew she was going. And I never heard the story behind why she recommended, but my dad got lucky and married this woman who had a very positive influence on my life. So, make a long story short, I went to Queens College for my freshman year. And then I decided to change to a profession that I'm going to pursue because liberal arts really didn't appeal to me. So my stepmother at the time suggested business. She said, you make a great businessman. One of my favorite cousins was an optometrist. And he said, you make a great optometrist. So I applied to the Wharton School for Business and I applied to the University of Indiana for optometry. And lo and behold, I came home from Queens College one day and there's my acceptance to Wharton. And I said, I guess I'll be a businessman. The next day, I got my acceptance at the University of Indiana School of Optometry. And my reaction was, hey guys, you're a day late. Tough. That was my reaction.
Really?
And that's how I chose my career. The rest is history.
I love the decisiveness of that. I think a lot of people now would probably go back and forth with their decision. And you just said, all right, this is it. I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Is that sort of a pattern of your life? That sort of, you make a decision, you move forward with it immediately?
And that's an interesting question. I never thought about it. I do think about making decisions. And then once I make them, I commit to them and I try to make them happen. And if at any point in time I decide it's a bad decision, I back off and find an alternative. But yeah, I'd say I'm action oriented. I procrastinate some, but for the most part, I make the decisions that I have to make and I move forward. Yeah.
I like that. So talk to us about, and I say us, my listeners, and also, my kids are part of who are listening to the show. What was the business landscape like in the early 50s? I'm assuming it was heavily shaped by what had happened with the war that had just concluded.
The war had just been completed. All the servicemen were coming home. People were moving to the suburbs. People were buying cars. And as they moved to the suburbs and drove cars, they needed places to shop. So retailing became one of the fastest growing businesses in the country. I didn't go directly into retailing, but I ended up in retailing during the 50s, the late 50s. Actually, in the 60s, I got into retailing. But I worked with retailers in the 50s. From a manufacturer's point of view, we sold product to retailers, and my job was in the marketing end of it. So I did have exposure to retailing.
Which retailers were you working with?
Back then, it was home furnishings. So it was all the department stores,
Okay.
the specialty stores. And they were opening up so fast that when I finally got into retailing in the 60s, which is a whole story, but I couldn't hire people fast enough. We were just opening stores so quickly. Growth in the 50s and 60s was huge. It was just, I wouldn't say it was automatic. There's a lot of people went bankrupt because they didn't know what the hell they were doing. But the market was expanding so fast that you could make a lot of mistakes and still make money.
Please tell us about that transition. You said it was a whole other story, that transition from moving from manufacturing into retail. What was the story behind making that kind of change?
I worked for this manufacturer for 7 years and was fortunate enough to have a boss who became my mentor. He was amazing. He was a marketing genius, and he developed all kinds of marketing plans and stuff to do that was very creative. But he was not very detail oriented, and he liked to think the ideas and tell people what to do, but didn't have the vaguest idea how to make them all happen. I guess I'm organized. That's one of my strengths, and I'm able to make things happen. So he would come out with these plans, and I would make them happen. I would develop the process and the procedures and train the sales force. So that's how I got involved with retailers, because I had to visit retailers to find out how our sales reps were going to be approaching them, and what needs we could fill for the retailers became something that was on my plate. I had to find out what those needs were. After 7 years of doing that, my mentor boss came into my office one day and sat down, and he said, "You know, Mike, this is a family business." And I said, "Yeah, I know that." He said, "You know, you're also not family." And I said, "Yes." He said, "I think it's time to move on. And I think you need to develop your career, and it's going to be better elsewhere because there's very limited growth for you here."
Interesting.
So he introduced me to a friend of his who had started a chain of drugstores 5 years before. And he just recommended me, saying, "Mike makes things happen." Now, this guy had started this chain 18 years before. He had opened 18 stores. He made a lot of money in the initial years, and then he was getting to the point where the profits were dropping off. He was losing control. It was just getting too big, and he didn't know how to make it all happen efficiently. So, make a long story short, I joined him as a director of planning and organization. And he came up with that title, and I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "I haven't got the vaguest idea, but we'll figure it out." I started working in the first 6 months. I saw that their distribution center, their warehousing was all screwed up. It was chaotic. The flow of merchandise was chaotic. So I spent 6 months fixing that. And that started to flow, and merchandise started to flow much better. And then my boss came into my office one day and said, "Okay, you made this happen. I just fired the vice president of operations. You're now vice president of operations of 38 stores." That point was a year later. So that's how I really got into operations and retailing. And it was a learning experience on the job.
So there are a couple of things I want to highlight in that story. The first is, so there's a metaphor that I use, Mike, when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, and you can tell me what you think about this. I call it the kite and the string. And the kite is the visionary. They're the entrepreneur. In your case, it was the boss over that company and has big ideas. But the person with big ideas needs the string to keep them grounded to the ground and make sure that they don't just go crashing to the ground or flying off into the sunset. And so to me, that's the visionary needs someone who executes. It sounds like you were acting in that string role. Is that a continual pattern in your life where you see someone with a vision and then you make it become reality?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the jobs after that, I was hired as a consultant to do a report for a large, a multi-billion-dollar business, which was in the supermarket business, but they had a retail drug division. And I was asked to come in and do an analysis of their security operation. So I did my study and I issued my report. And based on that report, the guy in charge, the guy who hired me, said, "Oh, I got to introduce you to the CEO of the supermarket chain." So he set up a meeting with me and I met him for dinner. And make a long story short, at the end of the dinner, he said, "I need you to do another job for me." And he had just bought a chain of home centers similar to Home Depot or Lowe's, but before Home Depot and Lowe's. This guy really set the pattern for home centers. And he said, "I just bought it, but I need somebody to write a plan to take them from 18 million to 100 million in 5 years." I wrote the plan and I delivered it. And he then said, "Okay, smart guy, I want to hire you to make the plan happen." So that's how I got into another 6 years of making something happen. We reached 125 million in 5 years.
Yeah, I really admire that your use of your organizational skills, and I think you would agree that the systems mindset, right? The processes, the procedures that are necessary to make sure that the people you're hiring and firing and training and all of that happens the way that it should be done to achieve that vision.
Yeah.
I'm assuming systems are really important.
It's all about how to make it happen. Business is really very easy. Somebody once told me, and I've lived this my whole life, business is really very easy. All you have to do is find out what the customer wants and then give it to them.
It's so true. The trick is to give it to them consistently
and efficiently. And
yeah. And have other people do that on your behalf, right? That's the tricky part of that.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to pause the story here for a couple of things. First of all, let's just talk about the career path. So you're talking about how you graduated, and if I'm looking at this correctly, it looks like you graduated from Wharton in 1954. So then you were working with that manufacturer, then you were working with retail, then you're working with this company that's a home center. There's a lot of transition here. And the perception from a younger generation is that the time back then, there was a high degree of stability and a lot of loyalty and not a lot of movement between different jobs. Is that a false perception, or were you unique in the fact that you were moving from place to place fairly regularly?
I never did a study. I can't give you statistics, but things were growing so fast, particularly in the retail business. There was a lot of movement in the retail business. Good people were in demand, and they got offers from all over. I don't think I was unique. I think that was a pattern, particularly in my industry.
Okay. One question that I have is about work-life balance during that time. I know family is important to you. When did your marriage come into the picture and your first children?
I got married about 2 years after I graduated, 3 years after I graduated. And my first son was born 5 days after our first anniversary. And my second son came 17 months later. So my family grew up with me in my profession. They were there early on.
And how did you balance that? Or was that not something that was done? I know now a lot of people talk about work-life balance, but it seems like 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe the same emphasis wasn't there, or it was okay for the man, the breadwinner, to be out long hours and working. What was it like in your case?
I worked long hours. There was no question about it, but I always set my family as a priority. So, for example, when my kids got older and they started playing Little League, I was a Little League manager. And as busy as I was, I would take time off to go to practices and to go to games on weekends. And to balance that, many Saturdays and Sundays, I put my kids in the car and I took them around to all the stores and they visited the stores with me. I did my thing with the managers and they looked around and did whatever they did. But I spent time with them. While we were driving from store to store, we interacted. So I set my priorities. I spent a lot of time away from home because I did work long hours. It got to the point where I had a meeting one night that lasted till 2:00 in the morning.
Wow.
And when I got home, my wife was a little bit, more than a little bit angry. So the next day I went into the office and I told my boss, I'm all for giving you all, but this can't happen again. And I told him what happened. And the next day, my wife called me and she said, Henry just sent me a color television set.
Which would be a really big deal back then.
Back then, yeah, that was a really big deal. So yeah, he tried to make up for it, but we had our issues with timing. I never spent enough time at home to suit my wife.
But that's fantastic that you made it a priority. I'm not sure that everyone during that time was prioritizing things the same way. Is that accurate, or the people you worked with?
I can only speak for myself, but I saw a lot of people who spent more time away from home than I did, who did not set those priorities. But I couldn't live my life like that. I needed to be with my kids and my wife.
Where did that priority come from? Was that from the example of your parents or the family you grew up in, or was it you wanted things to be better than what you had experienced when you were younger?
I think it was, I wanted things to be better. My father was a dentist. He had two offices, one in the house and one at a distance. And he was in the office almost all the time, 7 days a week, Sundays included, because he did emergencies on Sundays. I did get to see him, and we played baseball. He threw the ball back and forth with me. That was about the extent. But he did not spend a lot of time with me. And yeah, I wanted to make it better. I really wanted to make it better.
I love that. Because to me, I mean, a big part of this show is I want to talk to people who it's not just about the financial success. It's not just about the career success, but it's also that balance. It's spending time with family, taking time for yourself. If you're not doing those things, then the success really isn't as sweet, is it? It's just money.
Right. Money was never the driving factor for me. I mean, it was important. I had to pay my bills. I wanted my kids to be safe and secure, and my wife. But I never had the ambition to have piles of money. And that was just not the motivating factor for me. The challenge was the motivating factor, the being able to live a life that was comfortable. You know, when I say comfortable, I don't mean luxury. I just mean to do normal things without thinking about it.
Yeah. And that's part of why I admire you as I've gotten to know you, is because I can tell that it is about the challenge. You're still very active. You're still very involved in helping people and mentoring people at the age of 89. And the sense I get from you is you don't want that to stop. Why would you want that to stop? Because you're enjoying it, right?
I'm having the time of my life. Yes.
All right. So let's go back to the story here. I have a note that in 1977, you began management consulting at Ernst & Young. So what led to that transition?
After leaving the large home center chain, I went to work for a small home center chain in Philadelphia. And I guess that was one of the poor decisions of my life. It was not a good one.
Okay.
And after 3 years, I left.
What made that not a good decision? What was the error there?
I don't want to go into details, but it was run by three young brothers. The oldest was 24, 25, then 23, and then 20. And they had started this home center chain, made a lot of money. And again, the same thing I found at the other place. They got to that point and they were losing control of it, and the profits were dwindling. And I came up with a whole plan of what they needed to do to change. And basically they said, we're not going to do that.
Okay.
So we parted company. I got fired, let's face it.
Okay.
But before I got fired, I hired Ernst & Young with their approval to do a study to see if that was the right thing to do. And the consultant from Ernst & Winnie at that time, now became Ernst & Young, pretty much said that what I was saying was true. So they fired Ernst & Young as well. And Ernst & Winnie offered me a job. So I became a consultant for Ernst & Winnie.
Interesting. I like how that negative turned into a positive, but I also think we learn so much from our mistakes, from our failures. And so if you were to parse what you learned from that decision where it didn't work out, what was the thing that you learned that you would pass on to someone you're mentoring now, perhaps?
That the customer is king, and that anything you do to try to screw the customer is going to come back and hit you in the face. That serving the customer, finding out what their needs are and filling those needs is a full-time job. And you got to constantly look for new and better ways to service those customers, because if your competition isn't doing it, somebody new is going to come along who's going to fill those needs. So you can't just keep doing the old way, because the old way may have worked then. It ain't going to work going forward.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That is so true. And yet, gosh, so often now I feel like people forget that it's about the customer and they start making it about themselves. Not just the company, but people working in it, right? It's like, what am I getting out of this?
Yeah.
How is this serving me? Well, it's serving you when you make the customer happy. They're the ones really paying your salary. It's not your boss. It's not your company. It's them.
Right.
So talk to me a little bit about what that was like working for Ernst & Winnie, which later became Ernst & Young. What sort of things were you doing there?
I was servicing all the major retailers in the country. I was traveling 5 days a week, home on weekends, and then back out on the road again. Traveling, not the 50 states. I didn't go to Alaska and Hawaii, but Texas, Louisiana, California, Ohio, Pennsylvania. I was all over the place.
And for the unfamiliar, what is a day in the life of a management consultant? What are you actually doing when you show up to someone's business?
Well, I'll give you an example. I went out to visit a chain of retail stores that sold jeans, like the Gap. It wasn't the Gap, but another chain. And again, this was retailing. Everybody was growing very rapidly, and they needed some systems to help them to keep that growth going profitably. I sat down with the CEO, who was sitting at his desk wearing jeans and a sports shirt. And I'm sitting wearing my three-piece suit, which is my uniform. And after speaking for about 10 minutes, he said to me, Mike, you're in California now, and we're very casual out here. Why don't you take off your jacket and your tie and make yourself comfortable? So I said to him, hey, Dave, I'm comfortable. This is my uniform. I'm comfortable in my uniform. And we continued to talk. And about 5 minutes later, he says, when in Rome, do as the Romans. And I'm telling you, I really want you to take your tie and jacket off. Wow.
You were making him uncomfortable.
Yeah. So I got really cool. I took off my jacket. I unbuttoned my vest and I loosened my tie. And here I'm Mr. Cool. And we're talking. And he's shaking his head. And suddenly he reached into his desk drawer, took something out, walked around the desk, came over to me and cut off my tie with a scissor, reached in his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, which back in the 70s was a lot of money for a tie. And he said, go buy yourself another tie, but don't wear it in my office. So I spent the next 6 months, I guess, traveling out there pretty regularly to work on a merchandising system, which would help the chain decide what merchandise to send to each store and to manage the inventory and to make sure that inventory turned and to have a process by which this could all be done, some of it done automatically and some of it done by proper supervision and merchandise control.
I love the importance of adapting to the person that you're talking with, right?
Yeah.
And you have to do that a lot as a mentor working with people. You've got to meet them where they want to be met. And if they're distracted by you wearing a tie or whatever it is, you got to get that out of the way because that's not what matters.
Right.
What matters is how you're helping them.
My job is to help them fill needs. And if what I'm doing is not filling one of their needs, I got to change.
So right now we're talking about your career up through the late 70s. I'd like to pause for a second and reflect back. You mentioned about how working with that company with the young guys, that was not a great decision. That didn't work out well. Is there anything from that time that you find yourself reflecting on regularly and saying, that was either not a choice I should make, or that was a pivotal moment when I chose to do that? Boy, my career really was shaped by that moment.
Well, my career was shaped by what happened at the end of that role. So not the actual role itself that I played there. It was pretty much the role I played in every other assignment. Came into a situation where profits were starting to dwindle because they did not have a process in place. They were just shoving merchandise at the customer, and they thought that that was a good way to do business. So bringing order to chaos is really what I do. I'm an agent of change, I like to tell people. And people don't like change, so it's always a challenge.
Well, I love that phrase. I'm over here smiling, bringing order to chaos. Maybe that's why I'm so drawn to you, because that's what I do. In fact, I wrote a book called The Focused Business: How Entrepreneurs Can Triumph Over Chaos. And I talk about chaos a lot, and about how it's the thing that it represents energy, it represents effort, but we need to take that chaos and we need to focus it and really focus on what's most valuable in multiple areas of the business. So
Yeah.
it sounds like, at least in that case, we share a similar philosophy.
Yeah, well, I think the whole key to success is priorities, is setting your right priorities and fixing the things that need fixing to meet those priorities.
Yeah, so true. So at some point, you decided to hang up your own shingle, right?
Oh, that's a whole story.
Let's hear that.
I started my business at the lowest point of my life,
Mm.
at a time when nobody wants to start their own business. It was 1981. I'd been working for Ernst & Young for 4 years. I was traveling all over. I was having a good time, but very stressed out being away from home so often. I came home from my trip and was sitting in my office writing a report. And one of the other partners, not my partner, came into my office and sat down and said, I hate to tell you this, but we're closing your department and we're putting your partner in jail for trading stock in a client that he's not allowed to do.
Wow.
So I was out of a job, and I came home and I didn't know what to do. I was really up in the air, and it was very trying. But to make it worse, a week after I found that out, I learned that my wife was terminally ill with cancer. And so now I have a terminally ill wife and without a job, and I can't look for a job because I want to spend time with my wife, and all kinds of things went through my head.
My goodness.
When I left Ernst & Young, they closed down the department, but I was working with 2 clients, one in Mexico City and one in Pennsylvania, I think. And Ernst & Young said, you can keep those clients because we can't service them. So they kept me alive for a year and a half that my wife was ill. And when she passed, it was the lowest point of my life. I just wanted to dig a hole and not come out. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. My younger son had just gone off to college, so I'm an empty nester all by myself. And 2 weeks after my wife passed, and to this day, I'm convinced that she did it from up there, I landed a huge contract, and that started my business. I've been in business for 44 years now.
Well, that's a remarkable example of how adversity can create something positive. I mean, I'm trying to imagine what that would be like in your situation, to have to start a business at the same time that I had lost,
Yeah.
the most important person in my life. That would be pretty devastating.
If you remember back in the early 80s, but it was also a terrible economic time. Interest rates were 20%. Business was really in an upheaval.
So, given that that was the climate of business, I know from my experience coaching clients, especially I'm thinking back to the Great Recession, clients started dropping off real fast, right? Because the last thing that they're going to pay money for is a consultant or a coach. So, what were you offering, or what was the promise that they were buying into that had them say, you know what, this is worth the investment despite what's happening economically?
Well, first of all, I think it was very trying time. So you're right, there was not a lot of jobs out there. The one that I landed had been sold. It was a large chain of department stores, and they had already made the decision that they were in deep trouble and they needed to do something to fix it. And if they didn't fix it, they would probably have to go out of business, which they eventually did, as many retailers did. But they wanted to make the attempt. So they spent the money. The rest of them that came after that, they were few and far between at the beginning, which made it very difficult. But those that did, each of them had some element of their business that they were really good at, that they had found a need and they had found some solution to that need that really worked. And they wanted to capitalize on it. And they saw the opportunity and they just wanted to make it better. Some of them had experienced failures before and they didn't want to do that again. So they learned their lesson. Others just saw the need that if they didn't do it, things would be worse.
I'm going to dig a little deeper on this because you're talking about what they need. I kind of want to talk about you for a moment and what you were offering. What was it about the way that you presented yourself, or what was it about your experience and who you are that you think caused people to sign the name on the line and say, yes, I want to hire you, Mike, independent of Ernst & Winnie. I want to hire Myron I. Blumenfeld and Associates. What was your sales process to convince someone to work with you?
Well, first of all, I was after a different customer than Ernst.
Okay.
Ernst & Winnie was after the large retail chains. There was no way I was going to compete against that with no organization, no structure, no nothing. As one guy. At least I couldn't do that. So my customer client that I sought was on the smaller end of the scale, who would never hire Ernst & Young, never pay the kind of rates. So the fact that I was less expensive, but had charged the kind of rates when I was with Ernst & Young, I was worth that kind of money,
Okay.
but didn't charge that kind of money was a big factor. The fact that I had the experience to have done what I did, and the fact that I had actually run a chain of stores, that I had implemented systems, that I had done all the things that I did over the course of my career, were all credible factors that led to them to make the decision that, yeah, I'm going to take a chance on this.
How did you generate the leads for that? You're a systems guy, so I'm trying to dial down into the sales system a little bit here, because I think someone listening to this might think maybe that's for them, or they're an entrepreneur and they're starting their business and they're thinking, yeah, I want to start growing. But the hardest part is getting those first few customers. So you did get that providential first large contract, and yet there still had to be more. Where were you prospecting? Where were you generating leads and connections for people who might work with you?
I'm a firm believer in networking as being the best way to get any new business. Personal relationships are what business is all about. And so I made that as an integral part of my marketing philosophy. I would go where retailers go, to the conventions that they go to the vendors that they go to, and I would network. I networked with other consultants who did comparable, not the exact work that I did, but similar work that was related to retailing. And many of the jobs that I got were through other consultants who needed my expertise on some of their contracts that gave them an ability to expand their income stream, because they could now bring in expertise in an area beyond what they normally would. I had the same thing. So I would hire other consultants that I knew to be part of my projects, just as they would hire me to be. So I network with consultants, I network with retailers, I network with vendors to gain entry. And anytime I saw an opportunity, I pursued it.
So what does that look like? You're networking with someone, you get to know them. What was your philosophy for networking? And I'll explain what I mean. Like for me, one of my philosophies is when I network, the first phrase in my mind is give first. So I try to go not by looking to how I can get business, but how I can give help. My belief is that it will naturally come back. Is there a philosophy like that that you used, or is there a different perspective that you had? What was your process when you would network?
Again, I think there's two keys to success in any business. One is to identify the need that you're trying to fill and make sure that you have a process that will deliver that need better than anybody else. And the second half of that is to identify the target market that has that need. I meet so many people in business who say, everybody's my customer. Anybody who can give me money is my customer. But that's obviously not true. This is the old 80-20 rule. If you stay in business, there's 20% of your customers are going to end up getting 80% of your business. Those are the customers that keep coming back and back. And they're so happy with you, they refer you to other people. So they are a source of revenue as well. So identifying that 20% is key, because if you try to solve everybody's needs, you're going to end up bankrupt. But if you satisfy the needs of that 20%, the other 80% is going to come along anyhow, and they're going to buy anyhow. So by concentrating on your target market, this is what it's all about.
Yeah.
So clarifying those 2 points as to the needs that I try to fill, and I concentrated in my consulting career initially on organization development, on corporate culture, and on merchandise flow. Inventory management, a big part of what I did, which became a huge, huge problem in retailing. Not became, it always was a huge problem in retailing. You can make money, but if you sit on the inventory for 4 years, you're not going to make that money. It's all about inventory turns.
Yeah. And you had, at that point, close to 25 to 30 years of experience seeing that impact. So once you founded that consulting business, that became your career for the rest of the time. Would you still consider it your career, or have you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Except now I'm concentrating more on mentoring than I am on consulting. I have very little paying clients now. It's all give back now.
So let's talk about then the later stages of this, of Myron I. Blumenfeld and Associates. Did you have employees? You said that you were hiring consultants. Was that on a contract basis, or did you actually have like a team of people who are working for you?
I purposely did not want a staff of people. Going back to another story that tells the story.
Yeah, please.
A year after I started my practice, somebody introduced me to another consultant who had just started his practice. And the thought was, let's talk, and maybe there's some synergy here. We could work together on some things. So we sat down over a cup of coffee, and he said, "Hey, Mike, tell me about your business. What's your business all about?" So I spent the next 10 minutes telling him what I did. And basically I said, it's me. I do the marketing, I do the selling, I do the actual implementation, and I do this kind of work and that kind of work. I explained my business. And he looked at me after I spent time explaining, and he says, "You don't have a business." I said, "I beg your pardon?" "You have a practice. I have a business." So I looked at him and I said, "Okay, please tell me the difference between a business and a practice." And he says, "You have to go out there and do all the work. You're the one who's getting your hands dirty. You're the one who's talking to the customer and making everything happen." He said, "I hire people like you for $10 an hour, and I rent you out at $100 an hour. And I said, I can sit on the beach in Acapulco and collect checks. So I have a business, you have a practice." So I went home that night and I just did a lot of thinking. And I said, you know what? I want to practice. I want to be the one who's doing the work. I enjoy the work. I love what I do. I don't want to sit on the beach in Acapulco and collect checks. It sounds nice, but that's not what my life is all about. So I made the conscious decision that I was not going to build a huge consulting practice, a business. I wanted to be the one who did the work. Yeah.
That's such a great example of how a brief conversation can have a huge impact.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that brief moment changed everything about your career.
And by the way, he went out of business a year later. I'm still in practice 44 years later.
Yeah. And as I think about myself, I think I've split the difference between the two. I'm lean. I don't have many employees, but I do have some employees, because I've seen that in working with entrepreneurs, the moment you start hiring a bunch of people, you've just given yourself another job description. And that job description is manager and HR director.
Right. No, but you talk about having a conversation to make a change in your life, one conversation. I had a conversation that changed my whole life. And I've now had that same conversation with every employee I've ever hired, with every child I've ever had, every stepchild I've had, because I think it's so important. I told you my mom told my father who to marry after she died, and he was lucky enough to marry her. The week before they got married, she sat down with me and she said, Mike, next week I'm going to be your stepmother. But I personally don't like the term stepmother. It has a lot of negative connotations. I can't be your mother. I'll never replace your mother. She's very special, and I wouldn't begin to try to replace her. But we have to establish our own relationship. So my name is Mildred. You can call me Mildred. People who I'm close to call me Mimi. You can call me Mimi, or anything else that you feel comfortable calling me. So, by the way, I kept calling her Mimi after that. But she said, just because I'm going to be your stepmother and just because I'm older than you does not mean you have to respect me for that. I have to earn your respect.
Wow.
But you have to earn mine. And we spent the next hour talking about what that meant and how honesty and follow through and all the things that respect and love are all about. And I never forgot that conversation. And as I said, I've had it with every important person in my life.
Wow. Yeah, that's so powerful. And I love how you decided to make that a part of every one of your interactions as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned it briefly, but what are the things that you believe causes someone to earn your respect?
Living up to what you say. Do what you say you're going to do. Follow through. Under promise, over deliver, but deliver. Never give up on what you promised to do. Be honest. Greatest way to destroy respect and trust is to be dishonest. And that's very high on my list. And just, you earn respect by doing what you say you're going to do. People say one thing and do another. They write one thing and they do another. But people who are consistent in what they say and what they do, that's what earns respect.
That's fantastic. And I can tell that you're the kind of person who always tries to earn the respect of other people. All right, so let's step away from this interview for a moment. Mike has so many amazing stories, and I wanted to make sure that we covered all of them. So I'm breaking this episode into 2 parts. You'll be able to get part 2 of my interview with Mike Blumenfeld next week. See you then.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Show, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Research and assistant production by Victoria Budez. Sound editing by Mark Lamerjazy. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 Licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you have a suggestion for someone my dad might like to interview, please send it to guest@davecrenshaw.com. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.